I'm Amy Hallberg. I'm an author, an editor, a podcaster, as you can hear, and I am a creative mentor to writers in particular, but also people who are working on multimedia narrative craft. That's what I do. And when I founded Courageous Wordsmith, I had this idea of a writing circle that I wanted to do. It came into being because my friend Nicole Diaz worked on it with me at the beginning. And the idea parties, as we started to envision them, became something really special that is the model for what we do to this day in the Courageous Wordsmith Circle for real-life writers. She's still a dear friend. And while we were doing this, we recorded a series of podcasts that we called Storycraft about the creative process, and we completed 3 episodes. Nicole has moved on since then, and so I've held on to those 3 episodes until now, and I think it's time for you to hear them as a holiday present. Enjoy. We know we want to write. We know what we want to write, more or less, so why don't we do it? Let's talk about that. Welcome to Storycraft with Amy and Nicole, where we unpack one little bit of the creative process. This is episode 1.
So last week I had the idea that I wanted to get back into writing, get back into the body of work thing. What needs to happen next? What's the story that I want to tell? Who's it for? All these questions started becoming kind of this tangled ball of yarn, and there really wasn't an easy way for me to get started. And so the more I circled around it, the more I couldn't find a way into it.
Yeah, and yet you knew, you know a lot about how stories supposed to be structured and how to make it a really good story. You can recognize solid writing, and that knowledge base almost becomes a detriment when you're trying to create, you know?
Right. I wasn't trying to take the big thing on. I had to just take one small thing. Suddenly I was lost in, well, how am I going to structure this? And where do I start? And where do I end? And what goes in the middle? And there were too many unanswered questions, I think, in that moment for me to even take on. So it really had to be like, I'm going to start with the thing that's up for me here in this moment. And I'm going to write that thing down. Once I wrote that thing down, it became generative at that point, and it sparked another idea. And so before I knew it, I had written 15 things down, but it wasn't until I actually started the writing that the next thing was revealed to me. Does that make sense?
Oh gosh, yeah. And I think that's the secret, right? The writing generates more writing. You start gathering things. It's like if I go down to my kitchen and there's no food in the kitchen, except that every cupboard is full, right? And I just start pulling things out and putting them on the countertop. Some of the things I'll probably put back into the cabinet, but at least they're there so I can physically see them, and then I can start shaping it. Right? It makes no sense at all that food would be a perfect meal when I start. It's just ingredients,
Yes.
We want it to be this perfect thing at the end, but I don't know about you. When I've read perfect things, they fall fairly flat with me. The school essay that you're supposed to write, that's supposed to have, an introductory paragraph, 3 supporting paragraphs, and a conclusion. Those can be the most boring writing ever. But they're perfect. You were actually talking about reading a friend's piece of writing and how you could see this when you're not the creator, right? You could see very clearly what was happening. So do you want to talk about that?
Sure. So I have a friend who's writing a book about grief because she's experienced a lot of grief in her life, and that's what she supports people with now. And earlier today, she was reading to me a passage from her book, and she got to the end of the bit that she was sharing with me. And it was right at the end that I could feel that was where the story was starting. She kind of had to write all the stuff leading up to it. And then she caught me because at that point I started hearing from her how it was making her feel. versus all of the details of life leading up to the event. We talked a little bit about it, and I reflected back to her, here's what I'm hearing, and here's where my curiosity is piqued, and here's what I'd like to hear more of. And so we had conversation about like everything that you've written up until this point was necessary. And even if it doesn't make it into your book, it was still a necessary part of the creative process. It's almost like peeling off a layer of wrapping paper, and then there's another layer of wrapping paper underneath. And you have to kind of keep peeling back those layers to really get to the gift that's inside.
We package it up with all this bubble wrap, wrapping paper, all this stuff to protect the really tender part, because there's a part of us that knows that story is painful. Right. And what if people don't like it, or what if people judge us for it, or whatever? That would hurt so badly if you put yourself out there and they didn't receive it well. And so we censor the crap out of ourselves. And it maybe is for ourselves too. Like, we don't want to necessarily feel it. And so sometimes you were talking about how your friend was wondering what year did that thing actually happen. Nobody cares what year, as long as we can follow the context. And we've read writing like that, right? Well, like your friends too, right? Where you're just like, yeah, I don't need all these details. I'm kind of bored. When you get to that place where you're really feeling it, that's when we key in, whatever the thing that they've hidden at the center of it, even.
Right. Yeah. And that was one of the things that, as I was talking with her, especially because I know in the beginning when you're first trying to put something down, like it's almost like you have to go through those, I'm going to say superficial layers, not to diminish, but like it is superficial in some ways. Like a lot of the details are facts and figures and the things that we wrote the term papers on, like on this day at this time, this thing happened. But, we have to sort of go through that process as creators of getting that down on paper. So then we can see this really isn't relevant. But if we try to judge it too early on, and this is what I was sharing with her, you have to write it down and then you get to decide.
Right.
But first get it down and then decide what stays and what goes. It's all necessary, even if 80% of it doesn't actually make it into your book.
And it probably won't actually, right? Because
right.
You have all these ideas that you think go in there that you almost have to throw in there and go, that doesn't work, and reject. They're ideas that you initially had your heart set on. So it's almost like you have to try it sometimes just to see what comes out of it.
Sometimes when I do like a mixed media piece, often actually I start with a layer of writing, and I'll just write on the canvas or on the page, and then I'll turn the page and write some more, and I just write until I have nothing further, and then I paint over it.
You mean like the words disappear?
That's just the base layer. But I need to get it out. No one's ever going to see it, but it actually ends up adding texture to the final piece, even if you can't see it. There's like this necessary letting it all out that, at least for me, is such a critical part of the process, because it's almost like, okay, now I've done that. I've done the superficial layer.
And does it just lead fairly naturally then into the work?
It does. Yeah. I'm pretty heady, so it's probably part of it. Usually getting all that out kind of takes me to a place where I'm no longer thinking about what I want to do next. And so then it makes it much easier to feel what wants to happen next, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah, it definitely does. I also think that oftentimes, the act of creation causes us to bring up those questions that then lead us to find the answers. So some of that confusion leads us to questions we wouldn't otherwise have posed. And so the act of creation is actually generating the content that needs to be in the final project. Thank you for listening to this episode of Storycraft. We are Nicole Diaz and me, Amy Hallberg. Our editor is Will Quee. If you want to know about writing with Courageous Wordsmith, you'll find that link in the show notes. Meanwhile, what one shiny object is speaking to you? What if you go write that down? And we'll talk soon.